Hi, today I'm going to give you an update on where the bitter that we're making, how that's progressed. Ramped up the temp, pitched it at 16, ramped it up all the way up to 20 degrees, and then at 50% of its attenuation, took it back down to 16. Drew a sample of it, then put that in the fridge over the weekend, let it really fall out, and I've doing a sensory test. So I've tasted a bit of the sample, and no doubt the decision to not do any aroma or dry hopping or flavour has opened this one up quite a bit. There's a very clear profile on the yeast and on the malt. So far I'm pretty happy with that. I've been using WLP 066, which is London Fog, which normally you would use for a New England IPA style, so not, perceivably at least, not the most flocculent yeast of them. So that was also one of the things I wanted to try with the and get an idea of how clear or how long it's going to take for this to clear out. So with that, I have a secondary jar, because a lot of these measuring jars are not clear, so they're hazy, whilst a glass one that I've got here is perfectly clear. So what I want to do is I'll basically draw off a bit of this sample very carefully. I hope you can see me doing this. Just really carefully pour that over and attempt not to get any of the sediment. So I think I achieved that quite well, and you'll now see that is actually a little bit hazy. So clear indication, at least to me, that this is probably going to need a week or two longer than some of the more flocculent strains of English ale. At the end of the day, I am quite interested in the appearance, but in my mind the sensory taste evaluation is more important, and the refrigerator that I've used for this is holding about 6 degrees centigrade, and I know I have another one which I'm keeping at 4. So, and that has an impact on how much yeast is going to be falling out. So I do have the option to stick it in there for an amount of days, and it will fall out more, and it will also give me an idea of, okay, do I really, perhaps I have to consider with this one, because it is a very fine haze, that I actually have to put it on a keg and put it through a filtering routine before I carbonate. And I know a lot of breweries like Fuller's actually do filter their beers and avoid to have the yeast there. They'll have them sitting in a bright tank. So yeah, a couple of considerations still to be done, but overall I think it's looking quite promising. I'm brewing a best bitter, and the remainders of the sensory test are here, but it's given something of a revelation of sorts, if you will, that I thought would be quite helpful, and actually a bit surprising to me, actually, because I've been researching quite a bit online into making clones of various English bitters, and there's a varying degree of complexity, and particularly when it comes to the hop bill or the hop additions, on what you're adding, when you're adding it, and so on. And I've been go along with a pretty standard 3-way, where you had one fairly big bittering addition, a flavour addition and an aroma addition. And I've not really been pleased with that at all. So for this time round, I actually decided to scrap the flavour and aroma completely and just do a bitterness addition with 2 hops. That was Fuggle and East Kent Golding. And it's really turned out to be a bit of an eye-opener, really, because I did a sensory test on the 2 hops, and I could find very quickly that I could discern the 2 quite easily between them, where Fuggle's being a little bit more pungent than EKG and seemingly a bit fruity. So I had it slightly Fuggle heavy, but tried to balance the 2 in volume so that they would kind of play along with each other rather than trying to compete. And so far, I mean, the sensory test has shown me that, you know what, when it comes to a bitter, you're definitely onto something there. And it's very different from a pale ale, where you generally want to have aromas in particular, and particularly when you go over to American styles where you want a lot of aromas. And that's been really interesting because I could definitely now taste and have a sense of both the malt and the yeast. So we generally say this beer is malt forward, or this is hop forward, or this is yeast forward. But I'm pleased to say that I've really started getting to this sweet point of having a bit of both worlds, I think you could say. And the grain build, the mash temperatures, the fermentation regime seems to be really, really good. So we're coming into the area where it'll be fairly small tweaking to get this to be exactly where I want it to be. And it's going to be very interesting. I have 3 bitter recipes, and I'm going to be writing down quite a lot of notes based on this to use also in the others. I have a bitter that is a bit more spicy because I'm using crystal rye, and that gives this very distinct rye kind of spicy feeling to it that I think works really well in a bitter, but I wasn't 100% happy with where it went. And we have our 158, which is a very, very light, kind of almost Pilsner colour light bitter, where I put in basically way too much flavour and aroma hops. So the hops have basically taken over the place and they're not playing along very well. And from a brewing perspective, this is really, really, really cool because, of course, if you're just doing bitter, that makes your fermentation and potentially transfer to keg or bottle or what you're doing, it makes it a lot easier because you've got a lot less vegetal matter in there to worry about in terms of trub and hops and whatnot. So it's actually, from a lot of perspectives, it's quite a bit easier, and if that's making this beer more precise and better, then I think that's a double win and something that's definitely worth sharing. And it's also changed a little bit of my mind on what yeast to use with the various beers, where the rye bitter, I was kind of putting myself that, okay, I have to change that from VLP 023 to 066, which I'm using, to this. And now I'm thinking, well, if I I'll just change the hops the second for the second version of that, and adjust the hops down and evaluate then. And to say there for 158 I used the 023. Didn't really think it gave it to me, but I wanted that to be fairly dry, so that's driving back on. Okay, perhaps I should use an English dry yeast, and I'll actually get that the sort of profile that I'm looking for. I want very, very light drinkability. It's fairly low alcohol, and I want to create a kind of a sensory panel for myself where I'm saying, okay, I want, like the Not At All Bitter, I want it to be biscuity, I want it to be malty, I want it to have a little bit of residual sweetness. The rye, sugar and spice, as I called it, a bit of the same, but with this rye spiciness twist to it. And the 158, the first time we brewed that, I mean, the brewing itself went well, but it didn't turn out at all what I was hoping for, so back to the drawing board on that. And that's probably going to be later down the line.